Bienvenidos a Dagon, un jueguito que tiene que ver con precisamente el libro Dagon de Lovecraft. Y se supone que vamos a, pues sí, como a vivir la experiencia de estar dentro de una historia de Lovecraft o algo así. Está chido este juego porque tiene DLCs, güey. Los DLCs están chidos también. Son otras historias precisamente de Lovecraft. Dagon es una adaptación fiel e interactiva de la obra de H.P. Lovecraft que se centra en el ambiente y la historia. En este juego no encontrarás decisiones complicadas, acción a raudales o gestión de inventario. Tu libertad de movimiento es limitada y tendrás que avanzar en la trama a través de lugares en los que transcurre.
I am writing this under an appreciable mental strain, since by tonight I shall be no more.
Ok, escribo esto bajo una fuerte tensión mental, ya que cuando se caiga la noche habré dejado de existir. Durante tu partida te encontrarás con elementos interactivos. Unos te permitirán avanzar en tu aventura, otros te otorgarán información interesante sobre el relato corto en el que se basa el juego, así como en el contexto histórico del autor. Ahí hay simbolitos, estos de acá. Parte de esa información nos estará oculta. Para poder encontrar todos los secretos tendrás que enfocar tu mirada y búsqueda en el símbolo arcano. Ok.
Penniless, and at the end of my supply of the drug which alone makes life endurable, I can bear the torture no longer, and shall cast myself from this garret window into the squalid street below.
Esperes directamente una cita del
Do
libro.
not think from my slavery to morphine that I am a weakling or a degenerate. When you have read these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, though never fully realize, why it is that I must have forgetfulness or death.
Wow. Si mal no recuerdo del libro, es que Lovecraft es mi autor favorito. Bueno, si mal no recuerdo del libro, es exactamente igual, ¿eh? Wow. ¿Qué es eso? Morfina. La morfina se empezó a utilizar en el siglo XIX y era práctica habitual la de su utilización. Está mal escrito eso. Era práctica habitual su utilización para calmar los dolores agudos en la Guerra Civil estadounidense del 861 al 865 y en la Primera Guerra Mundial de 1914 a 1918. Además se vendió sin restricciones hasta 1914, cuando empezó la Guerra Mundial. Que bien. La morfina se hizo más popular tras la invención de la jeringuilla hipodérmica en torno a 1854. Friedrich Sertuner, el farmacéutico que aisló la sustancia por primera vez, la llamó morphium en honor a Morfeo, el dios griego de los sueños. En la época en la que se publicó Dagon, la adicción a la morfina, que se conocía comúnmente como la enfermedad del soldado, ya era un problema de primer nivel en los Estados Unidos. Puedes leer las curiosidades que descubras al instante o retomarlas más tarde desde el menú principal. Si las curiosidades te distraen de la historia, puedes hacer que no se muestren. Esto puede cambiar en cualquier momento en las opciones. Para... no sé si quiero. Vamos ahí aquí en la mesita. Avancemos.
It was in one of the most open and least frequented parts of the broad Pacific that the packet of which I was supercargo fell a victim to the German sea raider.
Ok. Fue apresado por un señor.
The Great War was then at its very beginning, and the ocean forces of the Hun had not completely sunk to their later degradation. So that our vessel was made a legitimate prize, whilst we of her crew were treated with all the fairness and consideration due us as naval prisoners.
Ahí hay otra trivia. Lo de las trivias lo vamos a tal, pero no lo vamos a leer porque es mucho texto, güey, la verdad. Sí los quiero descubrir todos, pero mucho texto es de verdad.
So liberal, indeed, was the discipline of our captors, that 5 days after we were taken, I managed to escape alone in a small boat with water and provisions for a good length of time.
Okay.
When I finally found myself adrift and free, I had but little idea of my surroundings.
Qué bonito se ve.
Never a competent navigator, I could only guess vaguely by the sun and stars that I was somewhat south of the equator. Of the longitude, I knew nothing, and no island or coastline was in sight.
Ni una isla a la vista. ¿La luna?
The weather kept fair, and for uncounted days I drifted aimlessly beneath the scorching sun, waiting either for some passing ship or to be cast on the shores of some habitable land.
Se le acabó el agua, ¿o qué?
But neither ship nor land appeared, and I began to despair in my solitude upon the heaving vastness of unbroken blue. The change happened whilst I slept.
Uy.
Its details I shall never know, for my slumber, though troubled and dream-infested, was continuous.
Las pesadillas.
When at last I awoke, it was to discover myself half sucked into a slimy expanse of hellish black mire, which extended about me in monotonous undulations as far as I could see, and in which my boat lay grounded some distance away. Though one might well imagine that my first sensation would be of wonder at so prodigious and unexpected a transformation of scenery, I was in reality more horrified than astonished. For there was in the air and in the rotting soil a sinister quality which chilled me to the very core. The region was putrid with the carcasses of decaying fish and of other less describable things which I saw protruding from the nasty mud of the unending plain. Perhaps I should not hope to convey in mere words the unutterable hideousness that can dwell in absolute silence and barren immensity. There was nothing within hearing and nothing in sight save a vast reach of black slime. Yet the very completeness of the stillness and the homogeneity of the landscape oppressed me with a nauseating fear.
¿Te imaginas despertar así, güey? O sea, que primero estés en el mar, acostado, bajo el sol, acá muriéndote, güey. Te duermas y luego despiertas y estés así.
The sun was blazing down from a sky which seemed to me almost black in its cloudless cruelty, as though reflecting the inky marsh beneath my feet.
Un trilobite. Los orígenes de Dagon. Estaría inspirado por Fishhead, cabeza de pescado. Por las afinidades sobrenaturales entre el inverso híbrido y el extraño pez de un lago solitario. Ah, qué chido. Vamos al bote.
As I crawled into the stranded boat, I realized that only one theory could explain my position. Through some unprecedented volcanic upheaval, a portion of the ocean floor must have been thrown to the surface, exposing regions for which innumerable millions of years had lain hidden under unfathomable watery depths.
No me da miedo los screamers a mí. Es demasiado predecible todo eso. A menos que esté muy bien hecho el screamer. Es muy raro que me dé miedo un screamer a mí.
So great was the extent of the new land which had risen beneath me that I could not detect the faintest noise of the surging ocean, straining my ears as I might.
De hecho, ni siquiera... ¿Dónde está el mar, güey?
Nor were there any seafowl to prey upon the dead things.
Ajá. Ni aves. Ni nada, güey. O sea que probablemente estemos
For
soñando.
several hours I sat thinking or brooding in the boat, which lay upon its side and afforded a slight shade as the sun moved across the heavens. As the day progressed, the ground lost some of its stickiness and seemed likely to dry sufficiently for traveling purposes in a short time. That night I slept but little, and the next day I made for myself a pack containing food and water, preparatory to an overland journey in search of the vanished sea and possible rescue.
Ya tiene esperanza de que lo rescaten, güey. Hombre, amigo. No sé yo, la verdad.
On the third morning, I found the soil dry enough to walk upon with ease.
¿Eso?
The odor of the fish was maddening, but I was too much concerned with graver things to mind so slight an evil, and set out boldly for an unknown goal.
Caminar por el horizonte, güey.
All day I forged steadily westward, guided by a faraway hummock which rose higher than any other elevation on the rolling desert.
Uy, pero las criaturas están más raras cada vez, ¿no? Ah, no, bueno, ese sí es normal. Pero esos son como arañas con tentáculos, güey.
That night, I encamped, and on the following day still travelled toward the hummock, though that object seemed scarcely nearer than when I had first espied it.
Ah, ya.
By the fourth evening, I attained the base of the mound, which turned out to be much higher than it had appeared from a distance. An intervening valley setting it out in sharper relief from the general surface. Too weary to ascend, I slept in the shadow of the hill.
Se durmió ahí
I know
nomás.
not why my dreams were so wild that night. But ere the waning and fantastically gibbous moon had risen far above the eastern plain, I was awake in a cold perspiration, determined to sleep no more. Such visions as I had experienced were too much for me to endure again. And in the glow of the moon I saw how unwise I had been to travel by day. Without the glare of the parching sun, my journey would have cost me less energy. Indeed, I now felt quite able to perform the ascent which had deterred me at sunset.
Ah, se le ocurre subir en la
Picking up
noche,
my
güey.
pack, I started for the crest of the eminence.
Agarramos nuestras cositas y nos
I have
vamos para
said
arriba.
that the unbroken monotony of the rolling plain was a source of vague horror to me. But I think my horror was greater when I gained the summit of the mound and looked down the other side into an immeasurable pit or canyon, whose black recesses the moon had not yet soared high enough to illumine.
A ver,
I felt myself on the edge of the world, peering over the rim into a fathomless chaos of eternal night. Through my terror ran curious reminiscences of Paradise Lost, and of Satan's hideous climb through the unfashioned realms of darkness. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, I began to see that the slopes of the valley were not quite so perpendicular as I had imagined.
podemos bajar.
Ledges and outcroppings of rock afforded fairly easy footholds for a descent,
Bueno, fácil.
whilst
No se
after
ve
a
la
drop
verdad.
of only a few hundred feet, the declivity became very gradual.
No se ve muy fácil de bajar, sinceramente, ¿eh? Pero
Urged on by an impulse which I cannot definitely analyze, I scrambled with difficulty down the rocks and stood on the gentler slope beneath, gazing into the Stygian deeps where no light had yet penetrated. All at
como un
once, my
cañón.
attention was captured by a vast and singular object on the opposite slope, which rose steeply about 100 yards ahead of me. an object that gleamed whitely in the newly bestowed rays of the ascending moon.
Un obelisco, ¿no? ¿Hay alguna trivia? No.
That it was merely a gigantic piece of stone, I soon assured myself. But I was conscious of a distinct impression that its contour and position were not altogether the work of nature. A closer scrutiny filled me with sensations I cannot express.
Sí, pues es como un
Despite its
obelisco.
enormous magnitude and its position in an abyss which had yawned at the bottom of the sea since the world was young, I perceived beyond a doubt that the strange object was a well-shaped monolith, whose massive bulk had known the workmanship and perhaps the worship of living and thinking creatures. Dazed and frightened, yet not without a certain thrill of the scientist's or archaeologist's delight, I examined my surroundings more closely. The moon, now near the zenith, shone weirdly and vividly above the towering steeps that hemmed in the chasm, and revealed the fact that a far-flung body of water flowed at the bottom, winding out of sight in both directions and almost lapping my feet as I stood on the slope. Across the chasm, the wavelets washed the base of the Cyclopean monolith. On
Pero se ven
whose surface
figuras,
I
¿no?
could now trace
Sí.
both inscriptions and crude sculptures. The writing was in a system of hieroglyphics unknown to me and unlike anything I'd ever seen in books, consisting for the most part of conventionalized aquatic symbols such as fishes, eels, octopi, crustaceans, mollusks, whales, and the like.
En medio está Cthulhu, mira.
Several characters obviously represented marine things which are unknown to the modern world, but whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean-risen plain. It was the pictorial carving, however, that did most to hold me spellbound.
Sí, mira, está Lovecraft, de hecho.
Plainly
Sí,
visible
Lovecraft
across the
está Cthulhu ahí.
intervening water, on account of their enormous size, were an array of bas-reliefs whose subjects would have excited the envy of a Doré. I think that these things were supposed to depict men, at least a certain sort of men,
Como
though the
sirenas.
creatures were shown disporting like fishes in the waters of some marine grotto,
Ajá.
or paying homage at some monolithic shrine which appeared to be under the waves as well. Of their faces and forms I dare not speak in detail, for the mere remembrance makes me grow faint. Grotesque beyond the imagination of a Poe or a Bulwer. They were damnably human in general outline, despite webbed hands and feet, shockingly wide and flabby lips, glassy, bulging eyes, and other features less pleasant to recall. Curiously enough, they seemed to have been chiseled badly out of proportion with their scenic background, for one of the creatures was shown in the act of killing a whale, represented as but little larger than himself.
Mames. O sea, están del
I
tamaño de
remarked,
ballenas
as I
azules. ¿no?
say, their grotesqueness and strange size, but in a moment decided that they were merely the imaginary gods of some primitive fishing or seafaring tribe. Some tribe whose last descendant had perished eras before the first ancestor of the Piltdown or Neanderthal man was born. Awestruck at this unexpected glimpse into a past beyond the conception of the most daring anthropologist, I stood musing whilst the moon cast queer reflections on the silent channel before me. Then, suddenly, I saw it. With only a slight churning to mark its rise to the surface, the thing slid into view above the dark waters. Vast, Polyphemus-like and loathsome, it darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the monolith, about which it flung its gigantic scaly arms, the while it bowed its hideous head and gave vent to certain measured sounds. I think I went mad then. Of my frantic ascent of the slope and cliff, and of my delirious journey back to the stranded boat, I remember little. I believe I sang a great deal and laughed oddly when I was unable to sing. I have indistinct recollections of a great storm sometime after I reached the boat. At any rate, I know that I heard pearls of thunder and other tones which nature utters only in her wildest moods. When I came out of the shadows, I was in a San Francisco hospital, brought thither by the captain of the American ship which had picked up my boat in mid-ocean. In my delirium, I had said much, but found that my words had been given scant attention. Of any land upheaval in the Pacific, my rescuers knew nothing. Nor did I deem it necessary to insist upon a thing which I knew they could not believe. Once I sought out a celebrated ethnologist and amused him with peculiar questions regarding the ancient Philistine legend of Dagon, the fish god.
Ajá, Dagon es el dios pez, eso no sabía. Dagon o Dagan era la deidad principal de los filisteos, que era adorado en el Oriente Medio como el antiguo dios de la fertilidad y las cosechas. A menudo se le suele confundir con un dios pez debido a la incorrecta interpretación de su nombre, ya que en hebreo la palabra Dag significa pez. En la obra de H.P. Lovecraft, Dagon es una deidad submarina. ¿Ok?
But soon perceiving that he was hopelessly conventional, I did not press my inquiries.
August Derleth y los metros de Cthulhu. Un escritor y antologista estadounidense, era amigo de Lovecraft y publicó muchas de sus obras en su editorial Arkham. Sí me acuerdo de esa editorial, está chida. A ver. ¿Dónde está lo que tengo que encontrar? No. Pensé que había algo en el reloj.
It is at night, especially when the moon is gibbous and waning, that I see the thing. I tried morphine.
Ah, por eso se volvió adicto a la
morfina. But the drug has given
morfina.
only transient surcease, and has drawn me into its clutches as a hopeless slave. So now I am to end it all, having written a full account for the information or the contemptuous amusement of my fellow men.
Lovecraft odiaba el tabaco, eso no sabía. Tenía una opinión muy marcada con respecto al alcohol. no le gustaban las... ¿Cómo se llaman las ediciones?
Often, I ask myself if it could not all have been a pure phantasm. A mere freak of fever as I lay sun-stricken and raving in the open boat after my escape from the German man-of-war. This I ask myself, but ever does there come before me a hideously vivid vision in reply. I cannot think of the deep sea without shuddering at the nameless things that may at this very moment be crawling and floundering on its slimy bed, worshipping their ancient stone idols and carving their own detestable likenesses on submarine obelisks of water-soaked granite. I dream of a day when they may rise above the billows to drag down into their reeking talons the remnants of puny, war-exhausted mankind. Of a day when the land shall sink and the dark ocean shall ascend amidst universal pandemonium. The end is near. I hear a noise at the door, as of some immense slippery body lumbering against it. It shall not find me. God, that hand! The window! The window!
La ventana. Se acabó. Nuestra pequeña piscina de horror cósmico. Estuvo chido. Bueno, a mí me gustó. No dio miedo como yo pensaba que iba a dar. Más bien fue como más narrativo. Y tienen como los... ¿Cómo se llama? Otros libros. Ahí está chido. Corto, sí. Siempre latino los juegos cortos, ¿verdad? También el anterior estuvo muy corto. O sea, el arte del juego está muy bonito. Está la jeringa de morfina y todos los peces muertos. Y la montaña. Qué chido.
And scary stories have been accompanying men for centuries. They have many faces and forms. But what is their purpose? Why do we enjoy being afraid so much? During our therapy, I'll try to...
Doctor Emerson Nocturnes. ¿Tienes ganas de más? Y lo está este. Ah, no encontré todo. Yo pensé que los había encontrado, güey. Puta madre. Están los DLCs, los dos. Little Glass Blood también es otro libro. Y este es otro cuento. Pero son cuentos cortos, güey. Por eso estuvo tan corto el juego, me imagino. Pues mira, no estuvo mal. Me gustó. Lovecraft, te digo, es mi... ¿Cómo se llama? Es mi autor favorito, la verdad. Y Dagon no es de mis libros favoritos, pero está muy bien. Está muy bien. Me gusta, la verdad. Dagon está chido. Pero estuvo bien, me gustó. Fíjate, luego pudiéramos jugar los DLCs. Pero son diferentes cuentos. No sé, bueno, no sé si son diferentes cuentos ahora que lo pienso. Pero según yo sí. También hay uno que me gusta mucho que se llama el... ¿cómo se llamaba este, weón? El de... Se me va. The Sinking City. The Sinking City está muy bueno ese juego. Me gusta mucho, es de mis juegos favoritos. Así que podemos jugarnos después. Pero esto fue todo por Dagon. Interesante, la verdad. Fue más como una novela visual que juego, pero estuvo chido. Aparte me gustó que mucho la narración. Estuvo como una narración muy profunda de... Y tal cual el libro. O sea, estuvo todo narrado muy bien, ¿sabes? Y da como que mucho ese énfasis en el que siempre Lovecraft hace de lo indescriptible y lo raro y cosas así que no... de hecho los personajes nunca pueden describir lo que están viendo porque es indescriptible. Entonces sí. Pero muy bien, me gustó mucho.